In this video, I'm going to explain what is meant by a close pass between a driver and a cyclist, what the law says and why it matters. I'm also going to comment on a video by CycleGaz, who's given me permission to use it, which I will link in the description below. So first of all, let's get the comment section fired up a little bit, because I'm going to talk about legislation, which is law, by the way. It's primary law created by the Westminster Parliament, the supreme lawmaking body in this country. The legislation for many road offences, but by no means all of them, is the Road Traffic Act of 1988. And many of the offences are also contained and referenced within the Highway Code. Now, whilst many people think that this is just a set of guidelines, many of them are backed up in law, meaning there is a penalty attached if you break those provisions, but also the guidance whether you should or should not do something is something that barristers such as myself would use against you in court if you've broken one of those guidelines. So with that in mind, let's take a look at what a close pass is, what it isn't, and why that matters. Now, there is no specific offence of a close pass with a cyclist, but before some of the drivers watching this rejoice, that's not the end of the matter. It rarely is. Instead of being prosecuted as a close pass offence, it's prosecuted under Section 3 of the Road Traffic Act, which is colloquially known as careless driving. More fully known is when a person drives a mechanically propelled vehicle on a road or other public place, so not just a road, without due care and attention, or without reasonable consideration for other persons using the road. He's guilty of an offence. That is the offence set out in Section 3 of the Road Traffic Act 1988, which is engaged if a quote-unquote close pass is detected between a driver and a cyclist. What that really means in practice is the driver has driven too closely to the cyclist when overtaking to be considerate and safe and driving with reasonable consideration for the other road user, being the cyclist. But how do we know how close is too close? Well, good question, because the Highway Code gives us that guidance. And it's that guidance which is going to determine how such an offence is prosecuted successfully, if this is proven, in court, because the Highway Code provides guidance as to how much distance you should leave between you and another road user, including cyclists and motorcyclists and horse riders and horse-drawn vehicles, in the Highway Code in Rule 163. Rule 163 talks about overtaking. Not only does it say that you should only overtake when it's safe and legal to do so, but not get too close, use your mirrors and all of that great stuff, but it also gives some guidance as to when you overtake motorcyclists, cyclists, horse riders, etc. Rule 163 provides that you should give motorcyclists, cyclists, etc. at least as much room as you would give when overtaking a car. It even provides guidance as to precisely how much space that is. It says leave at least 1.5 meters when overtaking cyclists at speed of up to 30 miles an hour. So how much is 1.5 meters? Good question, glad you asked. You see, many lanes designated as a cycle lane are not particularly generous, some of which only provide you barely more than half a metre. But if I were to back up from the camera by 1.5 metres, I would be going at least this far away. Or to put it another way, roughly the width of my sofa here, which is roughly 1.5 metres, give or take the fluffy bits on the side. So with that in mind, if someone drives very much more closely than 1.5 metres, such as the width of my sofa over there, one might well be accused of a close pass and driving without reasonable consideration of other road users, which is why you will have heard of drivers being prosecuted for careless driving, as it's commonly known, because they've driven too closely to a cyclist to be safe on the road. Now, it's worth bearing in mind that this is not just a slap on the wrist type offence, which might only attract 3 points and a fine. That's the starting point for careless driving, 3 points and a fine. But the court has the discretion between 3 and 9 points, meaning if you already had 3 points, the 9 would top you up to 12, meaning you'll get an obligatory 6-month ban unless you can show exceptional hardship. The court also has the discretion for an unlimited fine and the discretion for a ban. So depending on how serious the event is, the court has a very wide discretion if you are successfully prosecuted for careless driving. So with that in mind, let's take a look at Cycle Gaz's video. I'll turn the brightness on my camera down a little and I'll give you some commentary on that as we go along. So straight away you can see that this is one of those pathetic excuses for a cycle lane that I mentioned earlier, barely more than half a metre. Use your judgment to see how close you think this vehicle is about to pass. Given the guideline minimum distance in the highway code that I mentioned earlier on and how far away it would put me from the camera, this far away. If you take a look at the wheels of this vehicle, which gives you an idea how close the vehicle is, the wheels are on the line and, as I said, barely more than half a metre from the curb, let alone the cyclist. But for me, it's the rear perspectives that tells the true picture. If you look at the rear wheel of the bike is almost on the line, that's to avoid the drains, and look how closely this white van comes to the other side of that white line, touching it as it comes in front of the cycle. Now, as you can see here, the vehicle was owned by a company which failed to respond to the police for a request for the details of the driver, resulting in a fine in court of £1,200 with the prosecution costs of £470. Now, on this same video, there's a very helpful guide so you can see just how close these vehicles pass. It will highlight the front wheel of this vehicle, which gives you an estimation of how far away from this cycle designated lane the vehicle is passing to overtake. That wasn't too bad at all. The next one, however, is the red car that comes past, a little bit closer than that car was just now, but still not quite as close as the white van. But just about a metre, I would say, which is not the best, but not as bad as the white van. Then, of course, we come back to the white van just for the comparison, and you can see just how closely this white van passed. In my view, there is no doubt here that the van was driving without reasonable consideration for other road users and would have been a successful prosecution. Now, the reason many cyclists are making these videos is to raise awareness of drivers who are driving dangerously, carelessly, and really ought to be driving with more consideration for other road users. It's not just because the cyclist wants a bit more space, it's because it's inherently dangerous. There are many hundreds of cyclists killed every single year, and many thousands on top of that who are seriously injured. So the only way to improve standards is to raise awareness, raise the discussion, and hope that eventually more drivers will drive more safely, allowing cyclists the room that they really need. And just as I think about it now, this is yet another opportunity for my app, Proofify, which will allow you to store evidence. So if you happen to be driving around and you catch somebody doing something like this, you could store this as evidence, put it into a template, and send it off to the police for prosecution. Conversely, if you're the driver and you believe that you were driving sensibly or that the cyclist was the one driving dangerously, because there is an offence for wanton and furious cycling, then if you as the driver have got this evidence, you can use the app too, because you could store the evidence that you were in fact driving safely and that it wasn't your fault. All of which could be stored on the app Proofify. Sign up to the waitlist in the link in the description below. But in the meantime, please everybody drive with a little consideration for each other. We all share the road together. As I was once told when I was learning to drive, the roads are a flow of traffic. We should all be able to drive by looking out for each other, and we shouldn't need to have to resort to reporting other drivers for not giving each other enough space, driving dangerously, or worse still, deliberately cutting people off, which is of course incredibly dangerous. So with that, please make sure you smash that like button and subscribe, and I will see you next time.